Now, if you reverse engineer our technology, it'll lead you back to the UFO. If you reverse engineer the UFO, it leads you right back to us. So it's a circular process. Torque is a shock wave. And this is all about inertia cancellers. Basically, this thing was just a giant inertia canceller with an airbag system built in. No airbags, though, but it was an airbag system that floated people around, or beings, whatever. Now, you have gravity, which is centripetal. It crushes in. And you have anti-gravity, which slings out. Now, if you know anything about centrifugal clutches, the clutch arms swing out, or the disc, or not the disc, but the shoe, and it'll turn. Centripetal has a crushing. Now, this is gravity and anti-gravity, and you can cancel these waves out when it comes to shock waves. Matter has the most powerful shock wave. Sound has the second most. And light barely has shock wave at all, but it has a lot of energy. Okay, so let's talk about the rings and this part first. Okay, so that is this aspect right here. And this is where the rings are. There are rings at the base down here, and there's a reactor right here. And there are 3 emitters around it. You would call this the core or the pit. These would be the emitters. Now, our science, we would call this the solenoid and this the coil. And it'll hover there. Now, the rings are going to give it its spin. That's going to help. That's like its torque. That's its power. Now, the cyclotron that sits in the center that he talks about is going to help accelerate these particles. Now, beta particles move at the speed of light, but if it moves at the speed of light, they can accelerate other particles, which we can accelerate matter if we configure it properly through electromagnetism. And it's going to use mercury. The mercury is very important to absorbing shock. Now, this is a torque converter, and this is coupled together also that helps with torque. Now, a crankshaft has a lot of torque. And if you come up to a stoplight and you don't have a torque converter, you'll break your transmission. You'll break your crankshaft, break your motor. So this, instead of having transmission fluid, would have mercury in it. And this would run through the middle here. And this would be the body of the spacecraft. Now, ancient Vimanas, these ancient ships, supposedly used mercury vortexes. Now you see how the cyclotron has the magnet here and the magnet here. Now the body of the cyclotron itself is going to be this part right here, while this is the magnet. And there's going to be mercury in this. But this is only 1/2 of it. And then he can reverse these and it'll go the other way. Now, mercury has more density. It's a lot heavier, which means you don't need much of it. Now, it takes 12, 14 quarts of transmission fluid in a car to do its job. You don't need near that much. Now, accelerometers are crystalline chips. Because of the piezoelectric properties, they can recognize shock instantly, before we would even realize it or recognize it with our body physically. Nearly before the shock wave would even reach you. And this is what activates airbags. Now, accelerometers feel the torque and they send a signal that deploys the airbag. Now, that electrical signal is important because you can turn a shock into an electrical frequency, ultimately another shock. And we use crystal in friction discs inside clutches and transmissions, like we use a torque converter on a transmission. Now, with all that being said, to put this thing into perspective, now, from an upward view, these are tubes of mercury. Now, it doesn't even need to be a tube. It can just be a casted out hollow area for mercury to travel through. Now, it has a feed line, which is the solid dark one, and a return line, which is the dotted line one. And essentially, the mercury is going to travel around and back into one of these, or any specific one. It doesn't matter. It's going to create basically like we would look at a rotary engine, but it's the flower of life. And the mercury inside it would essentially go around like this. And it would create a bubble right here, which is like a shock absorber of mercury. Now, those accelerometers, or crystalline accelerometers, piezoelectric crystal, are built into the hull of the craft. Now, when this feels this shock, it can send signals into this mercury, either canceling it in or out, depending on how it needs to cancel, because it'll spin whatever way. The polarity can be reversed. You can think of this right here, this little core of mercury, or this little protection bubble, a shock absorber, a spring, an electromagnetic spring with mercury cushion. So basically, it was a giant inertia canceller that just housed people and they could carry them around. And it had centrifugal motion and centripetal because it's technically coupled together. Now, whether you can see a seam or not is beside the point. These people were master casters.